so we don't hear about it.
Their official line is that they're trying to put the reactors into a cold shutdown by the end of this year. But, I mean, that's assuming that the stuff that was in the reactors is still in them, which we know it's not because they were all cracked from the earthquake. You know, the corium, everything that's leaked out of there is in the ground under the plant at this point. And there's been some estimations from steam releases and from radiation readings over here that it may have even hit groundwater as far back as June. And what happens when it hits groundwater, it starts fissioning more because you've got, 3,000 degree material now hitting cold water. And there is a much bigger concern than about another explosive event under the plants.
Well, it sounds like we had another...
It's the China syndrome. It's,
right,
China
and it sounds
syndrome.
like we had an explosive event within the last 2 weeks where Reactor 2 had a hole blown in the side of it. I understand that the radioactive material getting down to water table, that wasn't caused by that, because that just creates mass jets of steam, does it not, and shoots this radioactive material into the atmosphere, right?
Right. And if the corium from the pressure vessels is down in the ground, there's still the problem that all those spent fuel pools are loaded with control rods. And they've had trouble keeping water in them because there's damage to those pools from the earthquake, and also because they used seawater to cool those rods at the beginning of the disaster. There's a corrosive effect from the salt that's occurring, and they just released a statement the other day, and I don't know why they're bringing this up now, that it's a concern they get the salt out of those pools so it doesn't cause further corrosion. Why they're all of a sudden bringing it up now, I don't know. It may have something to do with the Reactor 2, with the new hole, and the big concern is that spent fuel pool that's in Reactor 4, because that reactor was undergoing maintenance at the time of the earthquake, so all of the stuff that was inside it was in the pool, plus all the old stuff they had in there, and they had the new rods that were supposed to go in it after the maintenance was done. So those are highly radioactive, and that's the one, it has a huge crack in it. And, they've been pouring water on the thing, with cranes and trying to keep it cool, but, we just don't know what's going on. And when we do find out, it ends up being down the road a few months later, we find out it was, 10 times worse than what they said, 100 times worse than what they said, and that's been consistent with everything, with the water releases, with the ocean contamination. Everything they say is just so minimized from what what it eventually turns out to have happened.
And you're talking about Twitter reports from the hospital talking about problems with childbirth. But you'd also let me know there's Twitter reports from hospital workers. Give us the number of workers that have died at the site.
It's estimated to be around 4,300 workers. And that's coming from the Fukushima Medical School, where these bodies are being stored for research purposes. And that number seemed insanely high to me when I heard it. But, as just a quick comparison, I looked up what the death toll was from the workers in Chernobyl. And Chernobyl was one reactor lasting 2 weeks, and they had 64 workers that died. And if you extrapolate that to, at 8 months for 4 reactors, you come up with 4,096. So, it's definitely in the ballpark of what this person is saying. And, I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about this.
What's amazing is how, this cover-up, and it's somewhat conceivable that it would be, fairly easy to do. They're still uncovering bodies from the massive tsunami they had. We saw the army of people that were trying to, on the onset, trying to spray water onto the reactors and certainly risking their lives if they're alive now, they certainly will have problems in the future, but going there and trying to somehow get this under control. But it's all about keeping appearances up. So Tepco comes out and says they have 3. problem's under control. Our mainstream media doesn't touch it at all. We're told that there's no harm that came out of it. And in fact, I remember when Chernobyl occurred. It was a big news story for a long, long time.
Me too. I was in high school then, and that's all anybody talked about. And it was one reactor that lasted 2 weeks.
Right. And we were told, the cattle across Europe are going to be affected. You can't drink the milk from here, there, this place, that place, or the other place. Now we just have disasters happening, on a semi-annual basis. If it isn't the Gulf oil crisis ongoing, then it's Fukushima, and it's forgot about as quickly as it came about. Now, what do we have here? We got about 10 minutes left, so let's get a little bit into some of the questions I had were foods to avoid. Some people are noticing chemtrails are increasing. Do you think there's any correlation there? So let's get into that, and then what should we do? What do we need to watch out for? What is our best possible course of action for avoiding contaminated food or just contamination in general?
Yeah, the chemtrails I really can't answer. I certainly noticed a lot more spraying over this summer than I've ever seen before, but how it would relate to Fukushima, I don't know. The foods to avoid right now is the higher up on the food chain you go, the more exposure you're getting because of biomagnification. And I put out a video yesterday that you could show your kids and they could do a report on it for school. It's just a real basic breakdown of how radiation builds up in organisms. So, the more plants that you're eating, the better off you are. It's in the cows, it's in the milk. They found it in the manure, and the particles settle on pasture, and the animals eat it. So that, gets into the beef and any milk products or dairy products. You don't have to avoid them completely. You could just cut down from what you're used to having and make sure that you're eating as healthy as possible and taking care of yourself by getting enough sleep so your cells can repair themselves. Because even if you do have low-level exposure over a long period of time, if you're healthy, your body can fix a lot of that. It's when it gets into the DNA of the cell that's when the problems start, because then the DNA gets mutated and then it splits into mutated cells, and that's when cancer happens. So eating lower on the food chain, making sure that the water that you're using is filtered, and you can even buy a reverse osmosis machine that goes under your sink. That's what the people in Tokyo are all using. They're like $200. If I could afford one, I would have. That filters all the water in your house, your shower water and everything. But you can buy that water at the grocery store, and it's 39 cents a gallon if you bring your own container. It's filtered through activated carbon, which binds to radioactive particles and neutralizes them, and through a reverse osmosis. Distillation removes radioactivity. Boiling does not. And the big danger is people mixing, baby formula. Need to make sure that the water they're using is as clean as they can get. Tap water, really, I'm not using tap water for anything. Even brushing our teeth, we're using the bottled reverse osmosis water. And anything that grows with a lot of water, like spinach and lettuce and things like that, they've been finding that in our food supply. So I'm avoiding those foods. And when we do eat fruits and vegetables, I soak them in water with like a cup of baking soda. Baking soda, bentonite clay, and activated carbon all binds to radioactive particles and neutralizes them. And baking soda, you can mix it. You can put it in your kid's bath. You can ingest it. You can mix it into food. If you have high blood pressure, you have to be careful because it is sodium, so it can make your blood pressure go up a little bit. But then there's bentonite clay, which you can get from a health food store that's ingestible, and it just passes through you and it picks up any particles you might have ingested.
Wow, it's amazing that I have to go, that I can't get this information from Homeland Security. We spend billions and billions of dollars a year.
The prevention is easy. The prevention is cheap and easy if people knew that it would be helpful to do these things. It's much harder to control the sickness that you're going to get if you're exposed to this stuff, over and over again. Even if the levels are small, they're cumulative. They build up in your body. So and the point of the point of the EPA or whoever not taking these simple steps in informing the public is very simple.
they can't. They're terrified of creating any kind of a panic. You talked about the last time you were on, where our Secretary of State went and signed some kind of deal with the government of Japan in order to keep the commerce flowing, right?
Yeah. Well, they're protecting the nuke industry here, and as soon as the word of this gets out, people are going to look at the plants here and say, "My God, what are we doing?" The cancer rates are high around these plants, especially in kids. It's going to draw all kinds of attention to the industry we have here, and that industry, I'm beginning to find out, has a lot of applications to our wartime efforts, because each one of the reactors that are in the United States produces 500 pounds of plutonium a year, and it only takes 5 pounds to make a bomb. It takes less than a gram to put it in, artillery, and 1 gram or 1 pound of plutonium, if it was blown into the air and evenly dispersed, is enough to kill every single person on this planet. The stuff is deadly, and we shoot it over in other countries all the time, and there's huge birth effects in the populations of Iraq and Afghanistan, and not only the people that live there are having birth defects, but our soldiers that are coming back from the war and having kids, they're being born with birth defects.
Is
and
that
it's,
plutonium?
The exposure to all these materials.
Is that plutonium, or because I always thought that was depleted uranium that was in this munitions?
Depleted uranium and artillery, yeah.
Yeah. And you can find the evidence. I mean, it's actually you can find a lot of YouTube channels and other even more, I guess, authoritative scientific websites that show the effects of depleted uranium being used in the Middle East, and it's absolutely devastating. We have about 2.5 minutes left. I need to know, what are some symptoms? What is agitated with the level of radiation we see now? Is there any symptoms that manifest themselves early on, or is this all we're going to know 10, 20 years down the road that when we develop some kind of cancer?
Well, yeah, the later on down the road would be the cancer for sure, but right now the early symptoms of low-level or even high-level exposure would be headaches, nosebleeds, hair loss, irritated skin, itching of skin, even like peeling of your skin, especially if you've been out in the rain. That's another thing. The baking soda I mix into all of our soap in the house now, too. Fatigue, diarrhea, of course, like bleeding, bloody diarrhea, anything like that would be a symptom. And, any cells that divide in your body are the ones that are going to show it first. And we have cells that are constantly being replenished through our entire digestive system, all the way, through your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines. So, gastrointestinal upset. And then, the other added problem is it interferes with white blood cells and bone marrow, which causes leukemia, red blood cells in the liver. In treatment for this, if you went into the hospital and they said, well, yeah, you do have radiation exposure, they would give you probably a blood transfusion and tell you all these things I'm doing now to minimize your exposure. And if you're in an area where it's high, they would say move away from it. But, now where do you move?
Right,
It's
exactly.
the whole northern hemisphere and parts of the southern hemisphere are contaminated.
Well,
so we have to learn how to live with this in our life, because it's going to be here for a long time.
Have you noticed in some of your research any discernible uptick in these kind of symptoms you're talking about, these early manifestations of radiation poisoning?
Well, just me and my girls have had a lot of these symptoms. We've all had nosebleeds in the last couple months, which we never get. And I hadn't even talked to my girls yet about this. And my 16-year-old said, Mom, my hairbrush is like full of hair, and it's unusual for her. And she was getting weird bruises and things like that for a while. And that went away, and she's been feeling better, and it just made me really step up our efforts, so we can do as much as we can to minimize it.
It's terrifying. I mean, it's terrifying when you think about what's going on right now as we speak, as we're doing this program. What's going on across the ocean in Japan? This disaster that is far from over with. In fact, with the potential of a China syndrome, as we're talking about, this is ongoing.